On today's episode of Still Processing a 76ers podcast, there has been a drastic update on Joel Embiid's injury status, how that will affect the Sixers, we will get into. And then on top of that, the trade deadline's coming up, and we're going to take a look at some red light, green light candidates for who the 76ers could or possibly should look into acquiring. All that today and more on this latest edition of Still Processing a 76ers podcast. Hello and welcome to another episode of Still Processing a 76ers podcast. I'm your host, Zach Chiavella, here with the full group. Excited to have you. Got my man Justin Crosby, my man Sam DiGiovanni. Guys, this is the first pod with all three of us on it. How exciting is that?
Very, very excited to have the
about time.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a good news, bad news situation. Good news, we got the group, the whole gang together here today. The bad news, of course, Woj just tweeted out Joel Embiid undergoing procedure this week to repair his left meniscus. Recovery timeline is kind of left blank. Just know that he's going to be out for an extended period of time. Woj did follow up saying that the door is not closed on an Embiid return this season. There's going to be a clear idea on a timeline once the procedure is complete later on this week. So just to kind of dive right on into it, the sky is going to be falling for a lot of Sixers fans, obviously. But Sam, why don't we start with your take? What's your initial gut reaction? This news broke within the past 15 minutes. What is your initial gut reaction to that news?
Obviously, unfortunate that Joel is going to continue to miss time. Hoping that, the path that they chose, that they spent a few days deliberating, is what's best for him health-wise, of course, most important thing. So shortly after Woj broke the news, the Sixers released a statement, and it reads as follows. Joel Embiid will have a corrective procedure this week to address an injury to the lateral meniscus in his left knee. An update will be provided following the procedure. Woj followed up saying that, as you mentioned, the door isn't closed on an Embiid return this season, but there will be a clear timeline once the procedure is done. So obviously, again, first and foremost is, hoping that he gets well soon. This whole injury saga has been very, very disappointing. The fact that his season is not ruled out at this point is promising, of course. Still plenty of time left. They're going to need him back as soon as possible, obviously, to keep even a decent standing in a very hyper-competitive playoff picture in the East. So it sounds like we'll know more around, sometime later in the week. We thought the trade deadline couldn't get any busier. Now we're waiting for Embiid to have his procedures, see that timeline, and I'm sure whatever that timeline is will impact the teams, how they want to attack the trade deadline. So we will see.
Yeah, there's no doubt that this is going to impact the trade deadline. It's going to impact seeding, obviously. Comes at, of course, an inopportune time. You have the Milwaukee Bucks, who continue to flounder under Doc Rivers. I saw an interesting stat the other day, and we're talking about Embiid, so we're not going to focus on Doc. But he hadn't played a single player under the age of 27 in his entire time since being the head coach of the team, which is just fantastically on brand. But the Milwaukee Bucks are struggling. The Cleveland Cavaliers, the New York Knicks, obviously very hot right now. And it's just, you had a clear opportunity to not only overtake the Bucks for the second seed, but you also have to keep up with the Knicks and the Cavaliers. They lost the lead already. And now, there's still a ways to go until this, but you're trying to hold position over the Indiana Pacers. So with all this, it is not ideal, obviously, but when you think about the greater good, which is Joel Embiid in the playoffs, it's almost like a necessary evil. And Sam, just like you said, the most important thing is he has to do what's right for him by his health, which is unfortunately, kind of how we got into this situation in the first place, just with you know, trying to push through, which is admirable, but sometimes not the right course of action. Justin, what were your first thoughts when you saw the Woj tweet about Embiid's injury?
I mean, again, I echo everything you guys said, but I kind of figure it was going to be something like this because when the original information came out and said he was going back to Philly to be evaluated by doctors in Philly, that screamed second opinion. That screamed the first time we got a look at an MRI in Oakland or San Francisco that it wasn't what we, what he wanted to see. So ultimately, I was expecting this. I was expecting the worst, hoping for the best. And I think the Sixers and everybody, the fans, everybody who covers the team on a beat, I feel like everybody has that same thought process. So the fact that he hasn't technically been ruled out for the season is promising, but in my eyes, it just seems like that messaging could be for leverage as far as the trade deadline as it's still coming. So who knows? We'll see after the procedure when we get the real thing. But I mean, if this is what's best for Embiid and his career going forward, then I think this was the right move. It sucks to feel like he has a lost season when it was guaranteed. Basically, he was going to win a back-to-back MVP. But just hoping for some more clarity on his timeline later this week, hopefully.
Yeah, and with the meniscus, it can be a little bit funny. Once you're talking about surgical procedures, you're bare minimum, you're talking about at least a month, and up to season ending. Now, Woj already clarified he doesn't expect it to be a season-ending surgery. Obviously, more is going to be known after the surgery. There are, between whether it's complications or what have you, there's certain different factors to take into consideration that once we see how he adjusts to the surgery, how the surgery itself goes first and foremost, obviously, but how his body begins to react after the fact matters as well. Depending on the specific type of meniscus surgery, if it's a full-on meniscus repair, or I'm going to say this wrong, but meniscectomy. I think I might have actually powered my way through it. You're looking at different timelines. 4 to 6 weeks for mastectomy. Looking at more so that traditional kind of 3 to 6 months if you're looking at more of a full-on meniscus repair. So it's an extended period of time. Obviously, either way, a long time to lose Joel Embiid. Again, as you said, Justin, there was, you would have to be, and unfortunately there are select members of the media that you could say this about, but you would have to be a certain kind of person to not vote Joel Embiid for MVP the way that he was playing this season. If he met that 65 game requirement, which I mean, that rule is what it is. It's the fact that Embiid's not going to win the MVP because of this rule is not the reason that I have an issue with the rule. Tyrese Halliburton playing 20 minutes a game just to make sure that he qualifies for, pay bumps for all NBA nomination. Like that's the reason I have an issue with this rule. But if he did qualify for it the way that he's played this season, it's hard to argue anybody else unless Luka leads the Mavericks to an impressive leap up the Western Conference standings, which I just is my subtle watch out for him to overtake Jokic for the MVP. That's just all I'm saying on that. But
Shai goes to Alexander.
Shai is somebody who never gets enough mention, I feel like. And I think that's ultimately going to be his kind of undoing. It's not that Shai is not a deserving candidate. I mean, honestly, I would, and I'm not trying to make this a knock on Jokic, who's had an amazing year. I'd be ready to give it to Shai over Jokic right now, just based on what he's brought to the table, the fact that he's elevated such a young roster to the heights that they're at in the Western Conference is honestly a little bit insane. I just don't think that because there's that little bit of a popularity contest sometimes with these votings. That's the one concern that I have with Shai. But you're right, Sam, absolutely more than deserving of a candidate for MVP. Probably a 3-man race between those 3 guys going forward. But it's going to be interesting to see how that breaks. Justin, what do you got for me?
No, just quickly, John Clark, NBC, who you guys know, He is a respected media member in all sports in Philly. He said he was told that this is not expected to be season ending. So, I mean, we'll see what comes out, but that's still some more optimism that we have as far as Embiid's timeline.
Yep, John Clark on the plane with the meniscus surgeon, confirming that it's not expected to be season ending. Looking, I mean, hopefully, like it's not just not only season ending, not season ending, I should say, but there's a little bit of a ramp up period, hopefully, before the playoffs kick in. So we'll see how that goes. it's it's a bit of a bummer, obviously, more than obviously, especially for those who took the time to check out the Sixers just last night, Saturday night, as they played the Brooklyn Nets. Sam and I, we were down at the game at the center, and it was not pretty. Sam, we're not going to take much time to talk about this because we have our own mental health to think about. But what was your major takeaway from the game last night?
I mean, I guess I'll just put my stack of notes off to the side here. I had a whole thing. I was ready to go for 2 straight hours about this game now. Terrible, man. Just not a great game at all for the Sixers. And there is, obviously some sympathy to be had with not just Embiid being out, but Tobias, D'Anthony, and Nico. That is the rest of their starting lineup aside from Maxey, who came to the rescue in Utah. And I mean, maybe a little preview of how it's going to go for as long as Joel is out. Maxey's going to save them or he's not. And that's not any fault on him. It's just the reality of the situation right now with how the team is built. And obviously that's bound to change in the, leading up to the deadline. But the Nets treated Maxey like a superstar. They blitzed him a bunch near the top. And they forced him to make a really tough pass to the opposite side of the floor where they could recover, or there was just no one there from the Sixers to catch it on the short roll and then attack in the advantage. So there was a path for them to at least make it competitive. Brooklyn had a pretty good shooting night, and part of that was some poor defense from Philly, but just how many injuries they were dealing with. I mean, not a great effort. They should have at least kept it close against a not so impressive Brooklyn team, but yeah, not a great game whatsoever. Very forgettable in pretty much every aspect aside from Terquavion Smith's fourth quarter. That was very fun to see him light it up. He talked after the game about it, and it's pretty cool. But yeah, that was. I mean, when the best part about a game is how a player plays in garbage time, the status of that game is not to
Yeah,
so.
It wasn't a fun game. It's obviously one of the first things that you talk about when you're talking about the game is how shorthanded the Sixers were, and you're absolutely right. You mentioned 4 out of 5 starters not being there. You're talking about help for role player like Robert Covington not playing in the game, which based on what's coming out from practice earlier today, it does not sound like Covington's returning anytime soon, which is just really disheartening. Just for a guy who was such a big part of the process to come back to the city and to he never seemed to fully click in Nick Nurse's rotation, but he was producing at the very least, leading the NBA in deflections for 36 minutes for a long while there. So it's just a shame to see health-wise all the way around. But when you talk about how Philadelphia should have been a little bit more competitive against Brooklyn, Brooklyn also had their fair share of injuries. Like that's the thing that I felt like kind of got glossed over a good bit. Being short Dorian Finney-Smith, being short Day'Ron Sharpe, like these are actual contributors. Now if Mikal Bridges missed the game, yeah, we're probably talking about or at least we're probably more likely to talk about the injuries that the Nets are going through. But they put up that week of a performance against a team that wasn't fully healthy either. I mean, few teams are this time of year, and just the lack of energy and commitment defensively, just terrible. Some of the biggest guilty parties in that, Kelly Oubre first and foremost. Mo Bamba was. I got to call these guys out for this. Is terrible. And Patrick Beverley was not his typical feisty. He was feisty, but he didn't have that defensive, that solid defensive play that we've seen at times. And the whole team just spent the entire time overcommitting on rotations defensively, and they're helping on Ben Simmons, who didn't even take. I don't even think he took a shot the entire night. Did he take a shot?
Not one.
Not one shot. And you're doubling Ben, and it like these guys know Ben. They like everyone in the league knows the scouting report on Ben, and yet you're throwing double coverage at him when he's just going to dish to the open man. It's just that's part of what led to the whole 3-point disparage, disparaging between the stats, and which really kind of got puffed back up at the end because you talked about Turk and him just going absolutely berserk from 3 in the fourth quarter there, which probably could have used him a little bit sooner in the game. Maybe that's something that changes going forward if the Sixers continue to be so shorthanded. D'Anthony Melton already listed as out for tomorrow's game against Dallas, which he was
Batum as well.
hopefully supposed to be in there. Yeah, you're right. Batum as well. So like Ricky Council got early minutes in Saturday's game, and I thought overall he played pretty well. But I'm only using that as a point to say you can play Turk Smith earlier. Like the Sixers could definitely use. I understand that he's not a great ball handler, but he's one of the best the Sixers have healthy right now. So to have him out there, to have that shot making capability, that shot taking capability, which is another
willing shooter.
He's a willing shooter. That's just something the Sixers hardly have outside of Tyrese Maxey. I mean, Kelly Oubre is going to Kelly Oubre, but that's not the kind of willing shooter that we're talking about here. I mean, we're talking about guys who like, they will let it fly with confidence and with actually a chance. I mean, Kelly Oubre is kind of just spamming the left-handed finger roll at the basket, and it's just he did a good job getting the whistle yesterday, but not much else was extremely positive. But that was the case for most everybody on the Sixers. There's not really a whole lot of positive to take away from a game like that. You almost kind of throw the tape away in the bin and move forward. So we'll see. We'll see what happens Monday night against the Mavericks, and still in Philadelphia. But the story for the next week is, or half week, I should say, it's not so much going to be about what's going on the court. It's going to be waiting to see what happens with Joel Embiid. And it's going to be around the trade deadline, which is Thursday, which just incredible that it's come that quickly already. I feel like there's still so much to talk about as far as names that aren't available. If anyone has been keeping up with that, you're looking at people like Zach LaVine, who was in negotiations to be dumped to the Detroit Pistons, and now all of a sudden has season-ending foot surgery, which is just a fantastic job by his manager. You look at different situations like DeJounte Murray, where the asking price seems to be too high. There's not a whole lot of interest. Alex Caruso, again, the asking price seems to be a little bit too high. The biggest deals, OG Anunoby and Pascal Siakam, have already happened this year. So this is just kind of coming up as kind of a dull, kind of a boring trade deadline. And now Joel Embiid's hurt and out for an extended period of time. So the Sixers, who were expected more so a month ago than recently to be one of the big players at the trade deadline, what are they even going to do? So it's going to be interesting to see how committed they are. And Sam, I think you said this earlier, depending on the news that comes out regarding Joel Embiid's actual timetable after this surgery, yeah, I think that is going to affect the level of aggression and also the strategy going forward this Thursday into the trade deadline. But we still want to take some time, take a look at some players who we think might potentially be a good fit, or you might want to stay away from too. So, Sam, you had the great idea. Let's play a little red light, green light with some of these trade names that have been kind of floated around, talked about with the Philadelphia 76ers. We're going to go around first and just to give a brief explanation. It's not too hard to kind of follow along with it. Obviously, your red light, those are your guys that you think just the Sixers should not pursue at all. There's just not a scenario where you think they should pursue this player at the trade deadline. The yellow light is you could be talked into it, you could be convinced, you could be coerced. And then the green light, you're all for it. You're good to go. This is somebody who you think the Sixers should absolutely target. So, with that in mind, Sam, I'm going to turn it over to you. Who's your first red light guy here?
First red light is Kyle Kuzma. He's been mentioned as a trade target for the Sixers and other teams here and there, and I struggle to see how he would be a sizable upgrade for the Sixers. He's a fine player, but you assume he's going to take Tobias Harris's spot, and between the two, if Kuzma is better in a vacuum, that's one thing, but it's not by much, and I don't think his fit with the Sixers is as good as Tobias's. For all of his shortcomings, Tobias is maybe not as willing of a shooter as people in Philly would like him to be, but he's an efficient shooter. He has been for a while now. He can, and Kuzma, not so much. Whether he's been one of the main guys in Washington earlier in his career when he had the playmaking of some guy named LeBron James, he just wasn't always a super efficient shooter. He doesn't really go for super efficient looks. And this isn't even about just the fact that he's the leader of one of the worst teams. Anyone would be leading that Washington team into the second to last spot right now because that's not a good roster. But for me, I don't understand the upgrade of what Kuzma would provide that makes him an upgrade over Tobias. The only thing I can see is that maybe he'll have fewer of those games where, Tobias will kind of just like disappear into the background. He won't be aggressive. He won't, try to make things happen. I feel like Kuzma might have more of that, take over mentality, but even still, it's probably not with a skill set that makes the Sixers all that much better. And on top of that, Tobias is expiring. Kuzma isn't. I think with such a marginal upgrade, you might as well just keep the flexibility in the offseason. So I really do not see a path where Kuzma makes sense for the Sixers.
Justin, any thoughts on Kyle Kuzma?
I mean, that's good because I was thinking of him too. He was one of the people that I named as well. But yeah, I agree. Like he's not that much of an upgrade. Plus the contract. Plus I just feel like, in my opinion, when you watch Kuzma on the court, I just feel like he gets into these like Chuck modes, and it's just like maybe it's because he's playing with Washington, but it's just like it's not fun and good basketball to watch. I mean, he could definitely get a bucket when he's really concentrating, but it's like he just doesn't have I feel like he just doesn't fit well enough here, and not that much better than Tobias. So yeah, I definitely think that's a red light.
Yeah, I mean, as cozy as his pregame sweaters are, I agree. I just don't think that there's like a marginal enough upgrade to bring in Kyle Kuzma. And the one thing too is that I think as a defender, he's a downgrade from Tobias, especially on the wing there. So yeah, there's nothing really about Kuzma that I'm enamored with. I think that he could help several teams right now, but I just don't think the Philadelphia 76ers are one of them. So yeah, no, absolutely fully in agreement. Justin, who's your red light guy?
So my red light guy is somebody who hasn't necessarily been connected to the Sixers, but people have started to connect some dots of other trades go down. So it's actually D'Angelo Russell. And the reason I say it's a red light is because we there's been talk, of course, about the Lakers and DeJounte Murray and D'Lo and where will he go and whether a third team would be interested. And some people have thought that the Sixers could jump in to try to get that. And I just think that's a total red light. D'Lo is a super, super streaky player. He's a solid playmaker, but not that much of an upgrade of a playmaker to me over Maxey, and having both those guys in the backcourt, specifically on the defensive end. Now, I'm not saying Maxey is terrible. He's gotten much better, and he's gotten better, and he's holding his own. But him and D'Lo couldn't be on the court in the crunch time. It would just be Hunt City for all of the best teams that they play. You think about last year, how some games D'Lo didn't play with Minnesota and the Lakers, and sometimes even now, depending on how good he's playing, D'Lo's not even playing in the fourth quarter. Like he didn't play in the fourth quarter last night or late in the fourth quarter against the Lakers. So I just feel like it's a red light. Yeah, they could definitely use some of his scoring for sure. They need every bucket they can get right now with so many injuries, taking out all the, the point scorers that the Sixers have. But I just think even if, his contract, he has a player option. Of course, he would probably accept that player option. And then you would kind of be stuck unless you try to remove him again in the summertime after he, opts in. But, who knows the financial implications of that, whether if he opted in, can he still be traded? Like those are things I don't necessarily know right now. But I do think that, if there's any, even if you can get D'Lo for free, like just don't do it. And that's my red light.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you're right. He hasn't really been connected to Philadelphia, but you can kind of read the tea leaves as to why somebody may say, oh, well, this guy might be a potential fit. You're talking about an offensive-minded guard who theoretically could work off a bench role, but, with that guy specifically being D'Lo, I agree with you, Justin. I don't really see a path to how that exactly would work. And, with the player option, if he does opt into that player option, yes, you can trade him right away. But the problem is, if nobody wants D'Lo now, are they going to want him during the summer? So I don't think that there is any real purpose to him. And honestly, just based off a team chemistry perspective, salary numbers are relatively similar. Would you trade Marcus Morris for D'Angelo Russell? I don't know that I would. Sam, what do you think?
I think in that specific trade, I probably would, given the fact that they just need another guard who can create. But that's really maybe one of the only scenarios in which I would glowingly think of the Sixers trading for D'Angelo. He obviously would provide, like I mentioned, like he can handle the ball, he'll shoot from three, he can, take some pressure off of Maxey and whatnot, but he's just not the process the way he goes about it is not always super great. He's not a big factor from the foul line. He's not a great factor of taking it inside to the rim. He's a jump shooter, and he's a guy that operates, kind of slowly, more of like a change of pace type of guy. And while that can work sometimes, I don't know if D'Lo is the type of guy that would really uplift the Sixers. He would just be more of like a stylistic change of pace, which might be at least better to watch, but maybe not necessarily better in terms of like making them more competitive. So yeah, I'm out on D'Angelo as well.
Yeah, and the one interesting thing is just the last thing I want to say about D'Angelo Russell. What's interesting about him is that the success that he's seen obviously has been around LeBron James. You're not going to have that here in Philadelphia. Joel Embiid's going to be out for an extended period of time. When he does come back, a little bit closer to the playoffs, are you going to have that time where you have that kind of almost that black hole on offense that just draws in defenders so you can kick it out to Russell on the catch and shoot? I mean, yeah, you will have it then, but until then, how does this guy actually get his shot from three? Like that's been his most valuable asset. He's shooting over 40% from three, but again, he's working off of looks from LeBron. There's AD down low to kind of fill up that void a little bit, and you don't really have that in Philadelphia. I think that he'd be fine, but he wouldn't even. I would think, this is speculation, but I don't even think he'd be as efficient as he is in LA, in Philly, considering the other parts that are currently moving for the Sixers. But moving on to the next red light candidate, this one, some people probably aren't. I don't think people are going to agree with this one because this is a player who was reported the Sixers were interested in, and then right after, about the same person was reported that they're not interested in. I want no parts of DeMar DeRozan. I love DeMar as a player. I think that he, from what I've heard, is an even better person. I, in theory, think that there is a world where DeMar could kind of work as a Jimmy Butler light with this. And when I say Jimmy Butler light, I'm talking about obviously that season when he was with the Sixers alongside Joel Embiid. But there is just so much more mid-range action that Embiid is working now than that year with Jimmy. On top of that, to play him alongside Tobias Harris is it's an utterly terrible fit. You have two guys who don't want to shoot the rock from deep, and that's just never. I mean, we've seen that watching the Sixers for as long as we've had. We've seen that from time to time, and it just does not work out. He's a worse defender than Tobias, and mind you, you're not necessarily losing Harris to gain DeRozan. And in either scenario, I just don't think it's worthwhile. Losing a player like Harris isn't worth it for a player like DeMar. And if you do have them together, just how do they work together? You're talking about two guys who thrive in the mid-range. Meanwhile, the team's best player operates constantly from the mid-range, from the elbow and from the nail. Like there's just not that window into a cohesive offense. There's not that direct path. And then again, as far as a defender, I just don't think it's sensical either. I mean, as a facilitator, there's definitely things to like. Could you play DeRozan off the bench? You could try. I think you'd probably find that a little disrespectful. I just don't see a world where this works out. And Chicago, if they're wanting multiple firsts for Caruso, I would think that their ask is if not quite that high, because Caruso's low dollar value definitely helps. Still relatively high. I wouldn't even throw a first round pick for DeMar DeRozan right now. That's just me. What do you guys think?
Yeah, man, DeMar still has some juice left in the tank, but I thought about this. I mean, with the Sixers, no, for all the reasons you said. And I've thought about just like if Chicago does decide to go that route, what teams make sense for him? Because he really, at this stage in his career, he can create shots in the mid range, but his lack of spacing the floor from deep and his questions as a defender just makes him so limited. I mean, one that comes to mind is, I guess, OKC. I don't know if they would move him to the bench or whatnot, but I think with what they have going on with Chet as the spacing five, taking some pressure off of SGA, that would make sense. But for the Sixers, it really doesn't. For as solid as a player DeMar still is, the spacing with the frequency of post touches and mid ranges that Embiid and DeMar take, that's just not happening. DeMar has a skill that he's still good at, but none of the complementary skills that the Sixers need from their guys around Embiid. So yeah, very, very easy no for me.
Yeah, I am interested. It's more of a question than a comment.
Say it with your chest. Go for it.
I feel like if the Bulls are making a deal and they say, if you want Caruso, you got to take DeRozan, is that something the Sixers should entertain? Is a question to me, because if the Sixers really want Caruso and the asking price is high, like 2 first-round picks, and maybe they say, okay, you give us a first-round pick and a pick swap or 3 seconds or whatever, but you got to take DeMar. Is that something that the Sixers should entertain, given the roster construction already?
I can't imagine that DeMar is a contract that they would look to dump like that. To my knowledge, he's expiring, but I think in that sense, it does makes a little more sense, because that is such a nice talent upgrade that you take that upgrade. I mean, again, it depends on what else is out there, but if you take that talent and ask the questions later, maybe there's something that can be worked out. It is tricky, but I mean, I that just kind of speaks to how highly I think of Caruso, that it would make sense to just take DeMar, because he's expiring too. It's not like you're committing to, like who we mentioned earlier, Kuzma. You're not committing to him for 4 years. You're committing to him, again, correct me if I'm wrong, the second half of this year, and then that's it. So
I believe
for DeRozan, yes, not Caruso. Yeah, for DeRozan, yeah.
Interesting scenario. I think in that it would be more begrudging, but like, yeah, do it.
Yeah, so I would entertain the idea of basically bringing in DeRozan and Caruso. In that scenario, you're likely losing Harris, and I do think with what the combination of Caruso and DeRozan bringing together, I would say maybe not the exact scenario that you mentioned, but just the general concept of DeRozan and Caruso, you could probably sell me on. If you're talking about Harris, a first round pick, and some seconds for one or possibly a pick swap maybe included, whatever the draft compensation is. I mean, the thing is that either way, you're still talking about well more than a first round pick to land Caruso at all. So to land Caruso and DeRozan, you have to think you're going to be getting some as well in that scenario. So it's likely, if that would even happen, far more complicated than we're making it, where you're probably sending Harris to a third team. One of these teams that has had reported interest in him, like Sacramento, for instance. So the scenario is probably too complicated to the point where it's not even really worth talking about. But the idea of adding Caruso and DeRozan, in theory, it interests me, but I think that's more so just the idea of adding Caruso in general that kind of interests me. But moving on to yellow, Sam, who's your yellow light guy for us today?
I have for you DeJounte Murray, and this is a guy who the reporting from other reporters has been that he's a guy that the Sixers are kind of cooling on. Maybe that changes if they still want to push for the playoffs this year. They might need a guy who plays at a fringe star level, and the indication is that DeJounte could be made available by Atlanta. I don't think the fit is super clean with him and Joel, but I see a pathway in which it can work, and that's why he's a yellow light instead of an outright red. He's someone I've kind of warmed up to recently, just thinking of the skills that he has and if he's willing to be a little more malleable than what he was with Atlanta. I think defensively he is not, he has a higher reputation that's starting to come down to earth now, but he still can defend. I think he would be helpful. Like Nick Nurse is still hesitant to give Jaden Springer a ton of minutes, and I feel like they really need a guy who can serve as an on-ball stopper. And I think DeJounte has the build to become that if he wants to, and maybe with having Maxey and Embiid, whenever for when he gets back, like having them to lean on maybe will help him, conserve some more energy, take on a different role, and be that guy on defense. His shooting in years past hasn't been great, but he's improved this year a good bit. So that is kind of helpful of thinking, well, when he doesn't have the ball, what is he doing? Maybe he's not necessarily a floor spacer. He's probably not a guy that is going to generate a lot of super hard closeouts all the time. But if he's a guy that is willing to take and make the open three, and it's not just last I checked, it's not just his percentage that's improved; it's his volume. He's just taking more of those threes, and that kind of leads me to believe that improvement is much more legitimate. It also kind of speaks to the state of the trade market, where he's one of the better upgrades, even though he is kind of a shaky fringe star type of guy, and not to completely blame him for all of Atlanta's being chronically mid as they are right now. Like the fact that he's one of their main guys and he's supposed to be able to do all this stuff, but the Hawks are still not that great is a bit worrisome. But just given who's available at this deadline, especially with Levine off the table after the season, I see a vision in which he can get to the Sixers and make it work. I would be very cautiously optimistic about that, and I don't love the taking on of the rest of his contract for the foreseeable future, but I can see a way in which DeJounte would work for the Sixers, even if my initial belief is that it might not be the best fit.
Justin, what are your quick thoughts?
No, I mean, yellow is right. I mean, I'll lean towards green a little bit just because of the situation that they're in right now. And I think as his contract, as the years go on his contract, I think with the cap going up and the new TV deal, I do think that his contract won't be enough percentage of the cap wise to necessarily worry about. And I think it will be movable if they need to. But I just think they need somebody right now to help plug holes and stop the bleeding and be competitive. So, if it's a possibility and it makes sense, I do think that's something they should entertain and kind of worry about the fit with Embiid later.
Yeah, there's a bit I want to agree with you, Sam, on a bit I don't want to agree. Like you guys, I actually did have him as yellow, and I think that is where he should stay. The biggest reason for me why he's sticking yellow is the price point. The fit, I agree, Sam, is definitely wonky alongside both Maxey and Joel Embiid, and that is a little worrisome. The one area I do want to disagree, and it's like a fringe disagree, because I agree that his reputation defensively is greater than his ability defensively. I don't think he'll ever be that defensive stopper. I don't think he has the strength to do that. I don't think that he will ever attain that strength. And so because of that, that lowers the ceiling to me of what acquiring DeJounte Murray will be. I think he kind of is what he is at this point. Probably a guy who more than likely will never be an all-star again. I'm not trying to slight him. He's still a very good player. The 3-point improvements that you've mentioned, I actually feel a little bit more confident in than the idea of him growing even more as a defender. And he's a pretty good off-ball defender, which is not a bad skill. But when you look over the past 4 years, you have seen growth not only in his percentage, but also in his attempts in every single year, going from 3 to 4.3 to 5.2 to 6.2. Those are his attempts over the past 4 years, going from 31.7 to 32.7 to 34.4 to 36.8. Again, each of the past 4 years, you're seeing that growth as a three-point shooter. He's obviously seen a lot more catch and shoot opportunities playing alongside Trae Young. He's not going to have Trae Young in Philadelphia, but Tyrese Maxey and Joel Embiid will absolutely be able to find him off the catch. So I do think that there is a role to have. The contract, I won't say that it worries me. I think it's perfectly tradable, especially with the level of player that he is. And I like the idea that I think he while the fit isn't perfect, he's capable of playing alongside Tyrese Maxey. because you're looking for that postseason value as well. So that is what I do like about DeJounte Murray. For me, I just think he's going to be more expensive than what the Sixers should give up. I would say at most you would give up matching salary and 2 first-round picks, and I just think Murray's going to end up costing more than that. So that's why I had him as a yellow. But moving on from Murray, Justin, who did you have in your yellow slot?
In my yellow, I have Malcolm Brogdon. Yeah, in my yellow, I have him yellow because I feel like you can make the case for, of course, him being on a roster and the Sixers looking to trade for him. Kind of connected to him earlier when the whole Drew Dame thing went down. And after Drew went to Celtics, there were some rumors and discussion about him. The Sixers maybe being interested in him, or the Sixers may being able to go after him. It's definitely cooled since then, but I mean, he's a vet importantly on a team that's trying to tank at this point. The young guys do need to play. Shaden Sharp, Scoot, Anthony Simons, they all need to play. And I think that he would help the Sixers from a defensive standpoint, ball handling standpoint, and a scoring standpoint. Right now, I believe he's averaging like 15, almost 16 a game, shooting 40% from 3 on 5 attempts. That's solid volume. He would probably shoot more threes here. He can handle the ball. He can dish it. He's a bigger guard, so in the backcourt, it would fit well with Maxey. But then on the downside, Brogdon's health has just always been a question his entire career. And last year, I think he played career high 67 games. He didn't start any. He still starter worthy on some instances, but yeah, he's just never really healthy, and you can never really count on him to be healthy when you really need him. The Sixers are already dealing with health issues. They don't need another guy to come in and not play. Like, it's just frankly, and you also hear little tea leaves and whispers about his attitude and personality in the locker room. So I don't know how that would necessarily mesh here. I mean, the Sixers have had worse personalities in the locker room. I'm sure about that. But yeah, I just think that, contract wise, I think he's on the hook next year for like 22 million or something like that. So again, whether the Sixers want to pay that next year, I mean, sure, they could try to move him, but it's always tough flipping guys. But I do think he could help right now. He would definitely be at a lower price point than the DeJounte Murray for sure. You might be able to get Brogdon for 2 seconds, but you'll probably wind up having to give a first or maybe a fake first for him and matching salaries. So there's a thought process for the stopgap. So that's why he's in a yellow for me.
Any thoughts on Malcolm Brogdon, Sam?
I had him as yellow as well for a lot of the same reasons. I think he can be the right type of offensive spark that the Sixers kind of need. I like him more than D'Lo. I think Brogdon can, he's not a pure, rim attacker, but I feel like he can get downhill a little bit better, can do a little bit more. Has always been a pretty solid shooter, and I think especially working off of, stars like Embiid and Maxey, similar to how he did with the Celtics last year, I think he would be pretty solid. His playoff viability and his health do raise a lot of questions. Obviously, if he gets hurt or if he gets, played off the floor, then that's a big problem. His playmaking, like, he can make plays, but it's not necessarily his tendency. So if you're giving him the keys to the offense, you might, have to rely on him having a hot shooting streak to get anywhere. But I do think he can be integrated with what the Sixers have and be pretty effective, playing a few different lineups. So they could, bottom line, they could do worse. I think he would be a solid addition for Philly for all this.
I think they could do worse is definitely big time yellow light energy. And I agree with you guys. This is, I think, our first sweep 3 for 3 on the yellow list here for Malcolm Brogdon. It comes down to the injury concerns. A little bit comes down to price. I think that, you're looking at a first round pick to land Malcolm Brogdon. The Blazers are saying that they're not necessarily dying to move him, but if they can get a first, I think they'd be foolish not to, and I think they kind of feel the same way. So they're just making sure that they can get a legitimate first for Malcolm Brogdon, which is what I think the price ultimately will be, and just for a player who, yes, he does a lot of that the Sixers really need. He's a more than capable shooter, willing facilitator. He's not Steve Nash with it, but he can at least functionally work the position, and he can play alongside Tyrese Maxey, which is again huge, especially come playoff time. But all that being said, to give up a first round pick for it's kind of the same reason why I don't love the idea of bringing in a guy like DeAndre Hunter, who, when you look at the skill set, is a great fit in Philadelphia, but those injury concerns are just too much to concern yourself with, I think, moving into next year. And really, when you look, the Celtics were almost unable to move this guy. I mean, the Clippers deal fell apart because Brogdon had a red flag on his injury. Now he's played mostly healthy this season for the Blazers, but that doesn't just go away. Like there's still reason to wonder, why was there that concern during this offseason? I think that was a draft night trade, if I remember correctly, that just ended up not materializing. But
I think it was a few days before the draft.
A few days before, but you can't take that out of the equation. Like, there's not only is there a track record going back over the course of his career, but that was a very big red flag at that moment, at least for the Clippers. Absolutely. I think that Brogdon is deservedly so on that yellow list. So for me, and this is tough because this player is, when you look at fit, when you look at ability, this person is an easy green light. But when you look at price point, this is where we start getting into a little bit of trouble. And we've talked about this player a little bit tonight as well. But for me, that guy is Alex Caruso. And I love what Caruso brings to the table. I think he would be a major upgrade for Philadelphia. I think that what he brings defensively, nobody else brings, not even DeAnthony Melton, who the Sixers sorely miss. Part of the reason, as I mentioned, is that price point. The Bulls are looking for at least 2 second-round picks, is what all the reports are saying. That is just incredibly too rich for my blood, given the Sixers' small asset pool. If this were an asset-rich team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, even the Memphis, well, not so much the Memphis Grizzlies anymore, but the New Orleans Pelicans, any one of those teams, and maybe I'd consider it. But the Sixers only have what they have to work with, and they just got back to this point where they actually have some movable assets. So to move multiple firsts just for a player of Caruso's talent, which is immense defensively, but without Joel Embiid for so long, the Sixers are going to need some offense. And I'm a huge proponent of adding defensive players, but you cannot trying to pick a better turn of phrase, one that's a little more family podcast friendly, but you cannot expunge all your assets on one move for a guy who's going to average 10 points per game for you. I just don't think that's, if you find a way to bring him in for one first round pick and then even like a litany of seconds thereafter, I'm more than comfortable with that decision. But if you're talking about 2+ first round picks, I just think there's no way that you can, rationalize bleeding all those assets ahead of the trade deadline. So am I crazy? Does anyone disagree? I know Caruso is an immense talent, and he would be a green light on a lot of people's lists. So where are we feeling about Caruso?
I mean, I feel you. And I do agree. I think it's the price point. And I think because he's such a hot commodity in the league, the Bulls really can use that for leverage, right? And plus, what are they, 9th in the standings, something like that? Like, the Bulls and their organization, like in their front office, they're the type to like, all right, we're in the play-in, like this is good enough. And so they probably won't tank, even with Zach's injury. And then they resign Vucevic long term, like for 3 more years, like just like not even the best roster construction. But I digress. But I just think the price point is going to be a lot. I think a lot of people are going to want Caruso. A lot of contenders are going to try to get Caruso. And I think when it comes to the bidding war, like you said, do you want to give 2 first-round picks or more for a guy who's going to come in, yes, change your team defensively, but offensively, like specifically without Embiid, like you're going to ask Caruso to, like you said, maybe go from 9 to 10 points a game to like counting on him to score like 17, 18 points a game. And can he do that? Maybe, yeah. But no, it's probably not. So, I think that's a lot to give up where he doesn't pack that much of an offensive punch with the team missing Embiid.
Yeah, the Bulls are for sure. They look at themselves and they see a ninth seed in the play-in tournament, and the world looks at them and they see a team 4 games under 500. It's a big, stark difference between how they view themselves and how the world views them.
I totally understand the concerns about paying this price for a guy who is essentially a role player, not a guy who's going to come in and boost the offense. I totally get that, but I think Caruso is so good that you just almost like close your eyes and submit that offer if it's possible. I mean, and Chicago has been pretty unrealistic in some of their asking prices. Where is he? Visitor down here. Anyway, Caruso, like, and no shade to DeAnthony Melton, who you mentioned, Zach, but forget comparing him to DeAnthony. Like, he is one of the best defenders, regardless of position, across the entire league. He's a guy that you could go stick on just about any guard, any perimeter player, and he can be incredibly impactful. Like, we've seen so much about Nico Batum, how great he can be with not just defending multiple positions, but spreading the ball around, shooting threes, taking smart shots. That's the type of guy that Caruso is. He's a super smart role player that maybe he's not going to score even 15 points a game, but I'm willing to bet that he can help create better looks for others just by attacking the right gap, making the right pass. I understand that making a trade for that guy is really it's tough to envision when Embiid is going to be out for potentially a long period of time. So I understand like, oh, you're trading for him now when there's not a real shot at like going for the championship. And he does have, I believe, another year next year. So you would, even if you are getting him for next year, it's like making that trade now using those precious assets. Like it was mentioned, the Thunder, like they can throw picks at anybody because they have so many. The Sixers have to be very particular, very, make sure that they're using those super smart because they only have so many. But and I do understand your guys' concerns, but I still think I would leave Caruso. He was one of my green light guys. I think I'm going to leave him there just because I know like the high level role player stuff that he can provide. I think at the end of the day, like I'm super confident that he would make the Sixers better. So I would keep him a green light, but I do understand the concerns.
Well, you talk about confidence, and I think the one thing that could really convince the Sixers that Caruso is a worthwhile target, no matter the price, is their confidence in Joel Embiid's return ahead of the playoffs.
Yeah.
What they end up hearing as far as his timetable could decide that in a lot of ways. Because if you're entering the playoffs with, for the most part, healthy Embiid, Tobias Harris, Tyrese Maxey, Kelly Oubre in the proper role, hopefully a healthy DeAnthony Melton, you can say that you may have enough scoring at that point that you can deal with having Caruso as a guy who it's not like he's a nothing. This isn't, Ben Simmons as a scorer. This isn't Matisse Thybulle as a scorer. Like this is a guy who, he will give you like 8 to 10 points per game. I think his scoring would go down in Philadelphia as opposed to where he is right now with the Bulls, just because he is playing more minutes than I'd expect him to play in Philadelphia. It's more of a role, what have you. Again, this isn't a no for me. This isn't. I don't see Philadelphia convincing themselves. This is just a maybe we can get him cheaper in the offseason kind of a thought here. So with that confidence behind Embiid, yeah, anything could absolutely change. But Caruso was a green light guy for you, Sam. We just in case this happened, we picked multiple guys at each of these spots. So why don't you give us another one of your green light guys today?
Yeah, he wasn't my main green light guy, but I figured he would be mentioned, so I put him under green. I'm gonna name Bojan Bogdanovic of the Detroit Pistons. Man, not even the smelly Detroit Pistons can stop this guy from shooting the ball and scoring it at a very efficient level. He is pretty old. He had some recent. He hasn't been a guy that hasn't had like lingering injury concerns, but he had some stuff recently. But he's good now, health wise, and he's still very good at shooting the ball. His volume, his efficiency is fantastic. At 6'7", he has a nice high release point. He can shoot it really quickly. Can shoot it in a lot of different ways, moving off the catch, off the dribble. He can create his own shot. Not too much of a playmaker, but he is on the wing, so it's not like a situation like I mentioned Brogdon where you need him to be a really big playmaker for others. Like he's a guy that they can help really run their offense through when either Embiid or Maxey's sitting. He fits super well with both of them. He is the type of floor spacer that would make them so much more dangerous. Just imagine the when Embiid's back and he and Maxey can get back into their two-man game, you can't help off of Bogdanovich because he's going to catch, shoot, and probably make it with all that space he's getting. Again, think about how well he is doing with Detroit. Obviously, he's not leading them to wins and whatnot, but he's still getting those shots up. He is currently shooting 42.5% from three on 7.4 attempts from three per game. Almost half of his shots come from three. And that's what he's doing with the Detroit Pistons, man. He would be such a fantastic fit with Philly. I don't think his defense, it used to be pretty solid where he was the main guy guarding LeBron James in the series one time. He's not going to be a main guy anywhere he goes, regardless for the rest of his career. But I don't think he's so bad that you can't play him. I think he is such a fantastic shooter. He plays at a position of need. I think he would be a fantastic fit with Philly. And again, obviously, all this stuff is dependent on Joel, how long it will take him to recover. But I think if the Sixers believe that Embiid is going to be back at some point, they really should look to get Bojan Bogdanović.
Justin, any thoughts on the Detroit Bogdanović?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I've had him in the yellow, but I mean, Sam just convinced me. He was very convincing. But I think that he is a secondary ball handler that they do need. Regardless of Embiid's timetable this year, they need guys who are able to put the ball in the basket and take pressure off Maxey trying to feel like he has this, score 30, 40 a game for this team to stay competitive while Embiid is out in extended absence. They need guys that can get buckets. And I think he's one of those guys. He does it in his own way. He's not flashy. He goes at his own pace, but it works. And he's a willing shooter, and he will shoot 7 threes a game, 8 threes a game. And he won't, even if he's not making them, he won't shy away from it when it comes time to, be at the end of the game or in a clutch situation. So it does make sense. I think he has one more year on his contract, so the Sixers would eat that until next year. But he's definitely somebody with Tobias possibly coming off the books next summer can slot right into his starting role going forward if they did make that move. So, yeah, I mean, I had him on yellow, but Sam just convinced me to go green.
Yeah, listen, perfect fit from an offensive standpoint. He's a guy who can not only shoot the rock, but he can move it around a little bit. The contract, the non-guarantee for next year is certainly helpful. But on top of that, I would expect him to be back next season with the Sixers if they were to acquire him via trade. You can slide him just about anywhere. He's a little bit of a defensive liability, but even still, this team isn't doing anything without Joel Embiid, and with Joel Embiid, you are able to have a player or two like that in the lineup where it's much more important rather just to say that you have a guy who is not a defensive or not an offensive zero than a defensive zero. So you'd much rather have a defensive zero in a lineup with Embiid than an offensive zero. So this is basically the antithesis of a Matisse Thybulle type because Joel Embiid's going to plus up those poor defenders. And we've seen that at times. I mean, Kelly Oubre for a large part of the year has looked his best, obviously, when Joel Embiid is in that lineup. And Tyrese Maxey has seen a lot of improvement. Most of that, I would say, is just due to his competitive drive because he is, if nothing else, pesky as a defender and he has this immense hard work. But that being said, having that anchor behind you, again, is immense. So if the Sixers are going to do anything at all, it's with an Embiid in the lineup. So having a guy like a Bojan Bogdanović, who is not necessarily known for his defense, but is just an absolute sniper from three, absolutely, I'm all for it. So, Justin, who is your green light candidate?
Hear me out. Hear me out when I say my green light candidate is Andre Drummond.
Okay.
Now,
okay.
Now, I may not be as convincing as Sam was, but the Sixers need rebounding. Rebounding. And what is he good at? Rebounding. The Sixers with Embiid healthy this year have looked like and Nick Nurse's rebounding camp or whatever they did in the beginning of the year looked like a much better rebounding team. As he started to be hampered with some injuries, you can see that Embiid stopped necessarily going after every rebound and just like conserving his energy for the offensive side where he know that the team really needed him. Now without Embiid or the games they haven't, you see so many giving up so many offensive rebounds, and I just think they need a presence in the middle that's able to get rebounds and also catch lobs. Paul Reed has had some good games and some bad games recently, and he just never seemed like he's gotten it together from his great stretch at the end of the year last year and in the playoffs. Paul Reed played great and deserved the money that he got, but right now the Sixers need different options. And as much as Mo Bamba, as far as being a local kid going to West Town and living in Westchester and all that stuff, like he has some moments, but he's not it. He cannot defend in space. I'm not saying Andre Drummond can, but he's a much better, in my opinion, uh, like rim protector, and he's a lob threat. And I feel like Maxey, like when I envision a play with Maxey right now, I feel like with his downhill on a pick and roll, if they don't trap him, having a lob threat will be super helpful for him because he can either decide if he wants to do that floater, go to the rack, or do that thing. And like you watch the way Trey plays, and I'm not saying Andre Drummond is Oneka or Clint Capella, but I'm just saying it gives that live threat, and they just don't have that right now. Paul Reed is not necessarily a live threat, and Mo Bamba sure ain't a live threat. And I just think that he would be an upgrade over Mo Bamba for sure. And think it would give the Sixers a better look, and I don't think it would be expensive to get him. They need somebody who's going to pull those boards down and make sure they get an offensive possession instead of giving the other team another chance to score. So that's why he's on the green for me.
Yeah, and the idea of adding a center, especially as an innings eater, while Joel's out, I definitely think is attractive. I'm a big fan of the idea of bringing in a guy like Nick Richards from Charlotte. Andre Drummond is someone that fans almost instantly kind of attach themselves to as a guy who could come in to not replace Embiid, obviously, but to again eat those innings. And admittedly, from an offensive rebounding perspective, he's having a fantastic season. I think there's a lot of like Moses Malone to his game where there's just kind of rebounding his own shot. So I think he's still a good rebounder, but he is that way mostly just because of his size. There's not so much the technical, or I guess so much as he's not so much rich in technique as he is just ability to out muscle guys and just be the bigger guy down low has kind of worked out for Drummond. So as far as comparing him to Mo Bamba, I don't know that he does anything worse than Mo except for shoot the three. And I can think of at least enough things to fill out my hand on offense, on both sides that he does better than Mo. So in that end, price depending, yeah, no, I get it. And he's one of the best teammates that has been on the Sixers squad in at least like the past decade. I mean, he was huge when he was here, and the way that he supported the entire team, especially the blue coat guys. To have Drummond back, I think everybody would love. It's just a matter of price and does he do enough for the team? But Sam, what are your thoughts?
So through leading up to the deadline the past few months and thinking about what potential moves they might make for a center, I was really not digging it because I didn't feel like it was a position of great need. And the only guy that I was kind of like that I saw the vision for was Kelly Olynyk because he plays a different way where he's kind of a 4-5, can shoot, make plays. But obviously, I think the term innings eater is perfect for, I'm sure they want to remain competitive for as long as Embiid is out. And I think Paul Reed, as good as he can be as a backup, is very much overextended as a starter. Mo Bamba starting to become a little overextended as a backup. He puts together some very nice sequences and then just has some of the most confounding sequences. So he's been very inconsistent. And even though they would lose, a guy who can pick and pop, I think Drummond makes a lot of sense, not just for his familiarity with Philly, but because he can help them out rebounding, which is an area they do need help in, particularly on the defensive end, defensive rebounding. Like he can come in, help that. He is, bit of a lob threat. He's a big guy, obviously, and for at least the few instances where he'll go point Drummond and give us a Shaqtin' a Fool highlight. I don't think that's in his bag as much anymore these days, but at least, maybe the potential is there. But I would put him as a yellow light candidate. I didn't have him written down, but I would put him as yellow. I think that, trading for a center can sometimes be kind of risky business, especially because it's not always a position where you can just like stock up on it and be okay and just throw out a different combination here and there. But Sixers are going to need some center minutes, and if they do want to find another guy who can be a presence in the paint, Drummond is a pretty good name to go to. So I see the vision for sure.
So I'm a little excited personally. I did not think I was going to get this opportunity to have my guy for the green light. I'm a little bit giddy, so give me a minute. But this is a player who so many have connected to the Sixers. Granted, the asking price seems to be higher than people initially thought, but just offensively, he would solve so many issues for this team. And that player is none other than the other Bogdanovich, Atlanta's Bogey Bogdanovich, who, when you're talking about needing a shooter, when you're talking about needing a guy who can work as a creator, when you're talking about somebody who is on a deal that doesn't make you turn visibly ill, he checks all of those boxes. Just the way that he not only can shoot off the catch and shoot, but if you're looking for relocation threes, he can work that with you. He can even run that two-man game that Maxey and Embiid run, when Maxey's off the court. Like there's so much versatility there offensively, bringing in a guy like Bogey. And Atlanta, again, values him higher. They're pretty much for sale outside of Jalen Johnson and Trae Young. They've made it clear that Bogey is their most valued player on the block. I think it's worth it to go out and pursue him. I mean, Sam, kind of the way that you talked about Caruso, that's how I feel about Bogdanovich. Just, it's going to cost a lot. Just close your eyes and hit send, because this is a guy who can help you for years and years. I think that he would be a huge addition to this team, someone who can play alongside Maxey, play alongside Harris, play alongside Embiid. There's nobody who he really can't play alongside, looking from the roster top to bottom effectively. So someone who I just think would fit in like a glove and provide a necessary offensive boost, not only while Embiid's gone, but especially when Embiid returns. I could probably go on for hours. We already hit the hour mark in this podcast. What do you guys think about Bogey?
I like that. Yeah, I had him as green too. Both of the Bogdanoviches I think would be very welcome in Philly with the way they both shoot the ball. I picked Boyan over Bogey as my guy because I think him just being a little bit bigger will kind of makes him more likely to be viable in the playoffs. Obviously, they both have plenty of playoff experience. But yeah, man, Bogey can shoot it. He's another guy that defenses will not want to help out on and help off of, and it's going to be tough because of, again, assuming whenever Embiid comes back, having Maxey, like the Sixers just need guys who are willing to pull it, are willing to shoot it, and he shoots it really well to put the ball on the deck a little bit. I think he would be a super good fit with the Sixers. So yeah, it's very much a green light candidate for me as well.
He was in my green light too, and like everything else said.
And you went Andre Drummond over Bogey. You really are a good friend, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah, because I knew it was outside of the box. That's all. But no, I agree with everything you're saying. And the only thing I would say is the price. But I don't know. Maybe the Sixers spend all of their assets and get Bogey and Murray. Who knows? But yeah, I think he would fit well. Great secondary ball handler. Can do everything else. Have a little mid range too. Can get to the bucket a little bit. Not terrible on defense. Not a slouch, but he's not great. But still, if Embiid comes back and you're talking about going in the future with his long-term contract, like Embiid will cover up for a lot of those mistakes on the perimeter. So I think if they can make that happen, I mean, that's definitely something that would really, really, really help this team out.
For sure. Couldn't agree anymore. Before we wrap this up, just because there's so many names to pour through around draft time, Did you guys have anyone that you wanted to, not necessarily shout out, but just a player that you wanted to bring up real quick? Could be a red, a yellow, or a green that you just feel really passionate about that you're curious to see what Philadelphia could do with that player. Anyone who was on the list but didn't make the cut.
I'll bring this up to you guys. Who's a guy that I feel I kind of have a different take on him as a trade target from many other Sixers fans and reporters. I'm not super sold on Tyus Jones. I think he's a solid player, but to me, I don't totally understand. We might have talked about this previously here or elsewhere, but like he's a solid player, but he's not a guy that can fit with a lot of different players, particularly the guards, because he's an undersized guard. So playing him with either Pat Bev or Maxey is kind of, you're inviting trouble there. For as good of a playmaker as he is, for as solid of a player as he is, taking care of the ball while also, making plays, I don't know how great of a need it really is, because I don't want to say he's the same type of player as Patrick Beverley, but I just wonder how much of an upgrade he would be. And at that point, using assets doesn't make a ton of sense. So while he is a solid player and he's a guy that the Grizzlies have had him for a while. So if you're a playoff team and you have him, he's not a guy that you desperately need to upgrade over, but he's not a guy that a team should be looking for, or at least for the Sixers should be looking for, since they already have Pat Bev, who does a fine job, and they're already built highly around a smaller guard. What do you guys think?
Yeah, Tyus Jones was a name I was surprised didn't come up tonight. I do agree with your concerns. He's a player who I think the Sixers would be willing to acquire again for the right price. And I think the reason why I would want to stick to that for the right price, which is well under the price of a first round pick, is very much for those same concerns. And actually, the conversation we had, Sam, I believe, was actually at one of the games pre-game. We were talking back and forth, and Tyus Jones does so much well, and he would help the Sixers team out immensely in the regular season, and he would even be of assistance in the playoffs as well. But how much opportunity would he have to do that? Again, like you said, I don't think he's necessarily playing alongside Maxey. If he's getting a 10-minute run in the playoffs, that's absolutely helpful. Is that worth a first round pick? That's the question. So if you're talking about a scenario where you can pick up a guy for 2 seconds, which I don't think that's the case, that's one thing. It just doesn't seem realistic that Washington would move off of him for such a cheap price. So that would be the only scenario where I would say, and I, again, love Tyus Jones as a player. I actually do love his fit in Philly, just with those, asterisks attached. But it has to come with the right price. Justin, what do you think?
Yeah, right price. Can't spend a first round pick, fake one or not. You can't do it. You can't do it. Too undersized. You already have some undersized guards on the roster already. We talk about Melton, who's great at his length, allows him to play up to the on the perimeter on wings, but he's a smaller guard too. You can't do it unless, like you said, 2 seconds. All right, cool. Let's make the call. But if you want a real first round pick, either a fake one, yeah, you could miss us with that one.
Anyone that you're passionate about that you didn't really get a chance to talk about, Justin? Anyone left off your list?
Not really necessary. Not really necessary. I mean, there's all pipe dreams and discussions, but it did cross my mind when I think Shams had brought up that Klay Thompson, the Warriors would be listening to Klay Thompson offers. I said, thought about it, and I saw it was like, nah. But that's somebody where it's interesting to see if they are really taking calls, and clearly Tobias would have to be in a deal like that. But just a thought just came in my head.
My 2 cents on acquiring Klay. You mentioned Tobias has to be involved. What else is Philadelphia getting in that scenario? That's my immediate first thought. I value Tobias higher than current Klay. So, from that end, it's interesting. Again, it's one of those things that Klay's not leaving Golden State. It's one of those things that, despite whatever reporting comes out around that, is it really worth talking about? But so for the second time, I'm surprised that this guy went unmentioned. I'm elated that I get to talk about him, and he's an Atlanta Hawk as well. Sadiq Bey is somebody who, in or out of a Bogdanovich trade, I'm absolutely interested in acquiring, depending on the price, of course. He's heading into restricted free agency. Atlanta's not going to want to pay him. They made that abundantly clear. How much is it to get Sadiq Bey is my huge question, because he's a guy who I could see being the heir to Kelly Olynyk in a sense. Kelly more than likely is not going to be on the Sixers team next season. There's not really another Kelly Olynyk in this league, but there are some similarities. Oubre, thank you. I'm saying Olynyk left and right. This is what happens when we go on for an hour 15. This is why we try and keep our pods to about half hour 45. Kelly Oubre, thank you, Justin. You're a good friend on Lake Sam. So Kelly Oubre, right? Sadiq Bey can be that.
Sorry.
Kelly Oubre is likely not staying with the Sixers team past next season. So Sadiq Bey, with that restricted free agent status, I don't expect anyone to necessarily toss the bag at him next year. You could bring him back on a relatively solid deal. I wish he were a little bit more of a specialist from three, but even said, he's still a growing player, with the right coaching, right situation, that could change. But more importantly, what he brings to the table, he's long, he's athletic, he's a very solid rebounder, and I think he's an improved defender over Kelly Oubre as well. So with all that being said, he's the kind of guy who I think that you could reach out and grab, not only for the short term, but also potentially for the long term as well. There was a report, I cannot remember who it was from, that I remember months ago about the Sixers possibly targeting some young, controllable players around the deadline or ahead of the deadline. And regardless of that report, just that very concept, I do find interesting for building this team going forward. And it's part of the reason why I have interest in Bogdanovich as well. Not so much the young portion, but again, that cost-controlled rationale, just with how we've seen free agency dry up, the ability to have that control, I think, is going to be immensely valuable. And you're talking about players who, if you do find a trade in the offseason, which has always been part of the equation, having that cap space for a trade, these are players who could absolutely be included and possibly even have value in those deals. So Sadiq Bey for me is definitely a guy. I know we're going on a little long, but anyone have any quick thoughts on Bey before we turn in for the night?
No, I thought you were going to say Hunter, but
Hunter, if it wasn't for the injury history, I'd be interested in Hunter.
Yeah, Sadiq is solid to me. I get what you're saying with Kelly Oubre not being on the team potentially next year, and Sadiq obviously fits in as a 3-and-D wing. He's not a guy to me that stands out as a gigantic difference maker, but perhaps he's slowly getting, say he would be traded to the Sixers, he would be slowly, climbing the ladder of situations. He was with the lowly Pistons, the Hawks, and with a good, on a good team with Embiid healthy with the Sixers. I think he, maybe could be show a little different things, but he's not someone who I have a, gigantic interest in, but I definitely see the vision of a guy who can, defend multiple positions, shoot the three. I see where you're coming from, Zach, for sure.
Hey, man, the Hawks made it to the conference finals more recently than the Sixers, so I'd watch how you talk about him, fire sale or not. But
yes,
no, we went through a lot today. Obviously, the trade deadline is going to be huge. We're going to try and have a show post-trade deadline, either that very day or shortly thereafter, to kind of go over whatever moves, major or more likely minor, the Sixers do go through between now and then. But for now, thank you so much for listening. I've been Zach Chiavalella here with Justin Crosby and, of course, Sam DiGiovanni. And listen, this Joel Embiid injury, we get it. It's not easy. Trade deadline, not a whole lot of slop going around. Also not easy. Just like you guys, just remember that we are still processing.